This was quite a year in human nutrition. This is the search I run every day through the National Library of Medicine. I search through the contents of every issue of essentially every indexed English-language nutrition journal in the world, so you don't have to. Of course, there's lots of important nutrition articles published in other types of journals, cardiology, oncology, pediatrics, so I also search through a number of medical subject headings every day as well. Now, anyone can do this. Let's say you like tangerines, and you want to see what's new with your favorite fruit. You can go to pubmed.gov, type in tangerine, press Enter, and then click on Save Search, and you can have them email every time a new article gets published anywhere in the world on the subject of tangerines, free of charge. And if you're wondering, what am I going to do while I wait for my first tangerine email at 7 o'clock the next morning, which is when they send out the daily pickings? You can always catch up on all the papers previously published in the medical literature on tangerines, all 7,468 of them. Using my search criteria over the last 365 days, 12,226 articles landed in my inbox. You can usually tell just by looking at the title and abstract if they're interesting, groundbreaking, practical. The criteria I tend to use, picking which studies I'm going to cover every year. This year I ended up downloading, categorizing, reading, and analyzing about 3,000 studies, which I turned into 365 videos, so I could post one a day, year-round, to my new website, nutritionfacts.org, thanks to the generous support of the Jesse and Julie Rash Foundation. Now, 365 videos is like 12 hours of content, so I have to split it up across multiple discs. This DVD you're watching now covers about the first hour and a half of video topics, and I expect to release another 7 or so additional DVDs throughout the year, and then by summer 2012 I'll have another 12,000 articles in my inbox, and we'll do it all again next year. Even though you have the DVD, I do encourage everyone to check out nutritionfacts.org. It has all the videos from all my old DVDs posted online, completely free. You can rate videos, share videos, search videos, discuss videos. I have links to all the sources on all my new videos, so you can dig up the original scientific papers yourself, make up your own mind. I've got a daily blog. You can follow the site on Facebook, Twitter, so you can share this potentially life-changing, life-saving information with those you care about the most. In the beginning, blueberries were the best. Then walnuts took the title, then wild blueberries took it back. Then small red beans were considered the #1 most antioxidant-packed foods, until herbs and spices were tested. Frankly, I thought it was over in 2007. Remember, USDA had released a database of 277 foods. When only 40 foods were tested, blueberries were #1, but when hundreds of foods were tested, blueberries no longer even made the top 10. I ranked them for you by serving size and by cost, antioxidant bang for your buck. Mission accomplished until last year. The total antioxidant content of more than 3,000 foods, beverages, spices, herbs, and supplements used worldwide, the most comprehensive such study ever, by far. Are there even 3,000 foods out there? Just looking at the first page of the 138-page chart they include with the study, you know you're in for a wild ride when they don't just include something like gooseberries, or Indian gooseberries, or Indian gooseberries in a can, but even the antioxidant power of the syrup in this can of Indian gooseberries. They tested 30 different beers. For those who stay up all night wondering if there's more antioxidants in Coors or Bud Light, the answer? Miller, by a hair. But nothing compared, evidently, to Santa Claus beer from Austria, which put Guinness to shame, and all the rest. don't laugh. The standard American diet is so pitiful that beer represents the 5th largest source of antioxidants in the United States. They measured Captain Crunch, the antioxidant content of Tootsie Rolls, everything from Krispy Kreme to the crushed dried leaves of the African baobab tree, the skin of an organic lemon Norwegian jungle dessert. It took them 8 years to compile all this data. With 3,139 foods tested, you can get as nitty-gritty as you want, like those new gold kiwis. Do they have more antioxidants than the regular green ones? About 3 times as much. This body of work can help us decide hundreds of real-life grocery store decisions we make all the time, but it's easy to get lost in the details. Let's take a step back, which is what the researchers did. What does this body of work say about what we should eat in general? The first thing they did, Table 1, was to split everything into plant foods versus animal foods. Here's the plant foods, here's animal foods. On average, plant foods have 64 times more antioxidants than meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. This alone represents a powerful argument to eat a plant-based diet. Every time you eat something in this column, you miss out on an opportunity to eat something in this column. Animal foods max out at 100, plant foods go up to 289,000. Quoting from the conclusion, antioxidant-rich foods originate from the plant kingdom, while meat, fish, and other foods from the animal kingdom are low in antioxidants. Diets comprised mainly of animal-based foods are thus low in antioxidant content, while diets based mainly on a variety of plant-based foods are antioxidant-rich, due to the thousands of bioactive antioxidants, phytochemicals found in plants. In a review on vegetarian diets and public health published last year, they concluded that sufficient scientific evidence exists for public health policy to promote a plant-rich diet for health promotion. This does not need to wait for science to provide all the answers as to why and how. But this is certainly one reason. On average, 64 times more antioxidant power in plant foods than animal foods. But is this really a fair comparison? Included in the plant group were some things that were really just off the charts, like some exotic wild berries you could never actually find in a store, that really skewed the chart upwards for the plant foods. I mean, people eat things like corn. They don't eat things like dried Norwegian corn flours. So let's bring it down to earth. The average plant food does indeed have over 1,000 units of antioxidant power, but for comparison's sake, just to be fair to the animal foods, I'm going to choose the least healthy plant food I can think of, good old American iceberg lettuce, which I think of as basically just water. It does not have 1,157 units of antioxidant power. It has 17. Still beats out fish, though, which averages 11. Even salmon? 7. Chicken? 6. Iceberg lettuce has nearly 3 times more antioxidants than chicken. A hard-boiled egg? 2. And egg beaters, which is just the whites? 0. Even Coca-Cola has 4, the same amount found in cow's milk or yogurt, though soy milk only has about twice that. While plant foods average over 1,000, the best animal foods can do in the meat category is a serving of ox liver at 71. It beat out moose meat, reindeer steak, but still couldn't quite reach the antioxidant power of a Snickers bar. This is why we need to eat a plant-based diet. because even if you lived off of ox livers, the wild blueberry of the animal kingdom, one of the few animal foods that can beat out lettuce, you'd still never come close to your daily antioxidant needs. There is one animal product, however, that does kick some serious tush, topping 200. There are even some types of berries that didn't test that antioxidant rich. An animal product so healthy, I have to encourage everyone to consume it. When you're a baby. That's the antioxidant content of human breast milk. During infancy, breast is best. After infancy, plants are preferred. A few years ago, a proposal was published for a healthy eating index. I thought it might be interesting to look at the latest USDA dietary survey to see how the standard American diet is doing. The index is simple. It's a score of 0 to 100, which simply represents the percent of dietary calories derived from foods rich in phytochemicals. Phytochemical is just a more technical term for phytonutrient, since nutrient implies essential for life, whereas phytochemicals are merely essential for a long, healthy life. So if 1% of our diet is composed of phytonutrient-rich food, our diet gets a score of 1. If that's where half of our calories come from, then we score a 50. And if that's all we eat, we can max out at 100%. How are Jane and Joe six-pack doing? Here's the latest data on the standard American diet. 3% of calories come from beans and nuts, 3% from fruit, 5% is vegetables, 23% from grains, 17% is added sugars like candy and soda and other junk, 23% comes from added fats, butter, margarine, oil, shortening, and 26% of the American diet is meat, dairy, and eggs. For the Healthy Eating Index, we only get to count phytonutrient-rich foods, since they're the ones most associated with chronic disease prevention, treatment, and cure. So first off, the reason they're called phytonutrients is that by definition they are found in plants, derived from the Greek word phyton for plant. So automatically we start out with a score of 74. Neither lard nor candy are phytonutrient-rich either, so taking away the added fats and oils, we are down to 34. But the grain category is a combination of both whole grains, rich in phytonutrients, and refined grains, which have the phytonutrients largely removed. Only 4% of the American diet is composed of whole grains, like oats, barley, whole wheat, brown rice, and the rest is highly processed garbage like white flour and cornstarch. Yikes, down to 15, but it gets worse. 2/3 of our vegetables are white potatoes, half of which are potato chips. The average American eats 23 calories of potato chips every day, but none of the white potato products count since they contain relatively few phytonutrients. Similarly, 1/3 of our fruit calories are low phytonutrient juices, and so the typical American diet rates 12 out of 100. So on a scale of like 1 to 10, we get about a 1. How do you score a perfect 10? Theoretically, a vegan diet that has excluded refined grains, potato products, hard liquors, and added sugars and oils could have a perfect dietary index rating of a 100. Sadly, the score of most current American diets would be unlikely to be as high as 20. Yeah, we wish it were 20, which means that there is quite ample room for improvement. Vegan couple whose baby died of vitamin deficiency after being fed solely on breast milk. Isn't that what you're supposed to feed babies? Yes, but if you're not getting enough vitamin B12, then your baby's not getting enough B12. Parents adopted lifestyle after watching TV program about butchered cows, and ended up generating headlines like this: Vegans charged in death, over death, after death, neglect, neglect and death, and baby killing. Poll: did a vegan diet kill the baby? Why, yes it did. A non-B12 fortified vegan diet killed that little girl. And she's not the first, and if vegans don't get their act together and get their B12, she will not be the last. Surely this kind of tragic neglect couldn't happen here in the United States. Journal of Pediatrics last year, based on a CDC survey across a dozen states, vegan mother-induced B12 deficiency occurs in about 1 in every 500,000 live births in the United States. About 4 million babies are born annually, so American vegans put the health of 8 infants at risk every year. A follow-up study this year, published in the Journal of the AMA, testing 364,000 babies, suggests the number of infants placed at risk by vegan moms in the United States may instead be as high as 20 every year. How common is vitamin B12 deficiency among vegans? Last year, a study was published in which B12 levels were measured in the blood of hundreds of British vegans. What percentage do you think were deficient? Less than a quarter? Almost a half? More than a half? Or were more than 3/4 of vegans testing vitamin B12 deficient? Now, I'm not talking below average B12 or suboptimal B12 levels, or even what's clinically called B12 depletion, where your levels place you at high risk for deficiency, but actual bona fide vitamin deficiency, meaning that your levels are so low, your biochemistry is screwed up, your body just isn't working the way it should. And the answer is more than 50%, meaning you run into a vegan on the street, or at least on a street in London, odds are they are suffering, whether they know it or not, from vitamin B12 deficiency. 52% deficient, 21% depleted. What about ovo-lacto vegetarians? 7 and 17%. One thing I hear from whiny vegans is that B12 deficiency isn't exclusive to vegetarians. Meat eaters can get it too. They're right. 0.4%. There's still enough in the general population for public health professionals to debate whether or not we should just mandate adding B12 to the grain supply. Until then, though, what could explain this epidemic of vegan B12 deficiency? Easy. Only a small fraction of British vegans were taking vitamin B12 supplements. Well, no wonder then. Hopefully vegans elsewhere are smarter. Everyone eating a plant-based diet must ensure a regular, reliable source of vitamin B12. The mineral iodine is important for thyroid function, but critical during pregnancy for fetal neurologic development. Even a mild deficiency can impair cognitive ability. The derogatory word cretin was originally a medical term describing those with stunted physical and mental development due to an untreated congenital iodine deficiency. It remains one of the most common preventable causes of brain damage worldwide because of iodine-deficient soil, which is why most table salt is iodized. Iodine can also be found in dairy products due to iodine supplementation of cattle feed, and because it may leach into the milk from the use of iodine-containing disinfectants to wash the udders, dip the teats, and clean the milk tanks out with. Dipping the teats in an iodine disinfectant can decrease the bacteria concentration, but in cows with staph mastitis can actually increase the pus content in milk by as much as 60%. Regardless, the iodine content of dairy products contributed by sanitizing products is usually not regulated and is a non-deliberate source of iodine, but it is a source of iodine nonetheless. These considerations therefore raise concerns about the iodine status of pregnant women and women of reproductive age who are not consuming dairy products. So, last year they concluded iodine levels among U.S. women should be monitored, particularly among subgroups at risk. Good idea. So this year they did it. Iodine status and thyroid function of Boston area vegetarians and vegans. How did they do? One way to measure iodine status is with a urine test. The World Health Organization recommends we should average about 100 micrograms in our daily urine, unless we're pregnant, in which case we really like to see up around 150. This is where vegetarians came out. Not bad. Conclusion, U.S. vegetarians are iodine sufficient. What about vegans? 78.5. That's not good. U.S. vegans may therefore be at risk for low iodine intake. Therefore, vegan women of childbearing age should supplement with 150 micrograms of iodine daily. The best new resource for those planning a plant-based pregnancy is probably Vegan for Life by Norris and Messina, out July 2011. In this study of Boston vegans, concerns were raised about their iodine status, but one vegan's iodine level was so high they were excluded from the study. How is that possible? They were consuming kelp. As I've written in my iodine recommendations for a decade now, unless your neighborhood nuclear plant just melted down, no kelp. It just has too much iodine. And if you find yourself in Namibia, you might want to stay away from paddleweed as well. Other than that, though, and staying away from hijiki, which just has too much arsenic, sea vegetables are an excellent source of iodine. There's been a few recent case reports of iodine toxicity in breastfeeding women eating soup made from kelp, also known as kombu, which explains this: iodine toxicity from soy milk. Why? Because it was made with kombu, but if you just read kombu on a label, would you think anything of it? Well, we should. There was a worldwide recall, complete with headlines like, "Cafe Raid Seizes Banned Soy Milk." A black market trade was operating in the banned soy milk, even though they faced $500,000 fines. That particular brand has since been reformulated without kombu. The other way you can get in trouble with your thyroid gland is if you eat too many of them. Hyperthyroidism caused by excessive consumption of sausages. After tests of the sausage revealed levels one might find in a dose of a thyroid hormone drug like Synthroid, they concluded that this patient had an exogenous hyperthyroidism caused by excessive intake of thyroid-containing sausages. When you look at the nutrition facts label on soy milk, it says it has the same amount of calcium as cow milk, but is it absorbed as well? Calcium absorption in osteopenic, meaning low bone mineral density, postmenopausal women. An acute comparative study of fortified soy milk to cow's milk. Pretty self-explanatory. What do you think they found? Which works better? Soy milk, calf's milk, or the same? And the answer is the same. There is, however, a caveat. When it comes to soy, you've got to shake things up. A prior study found that some of the calcium in soy milk settles to the bottom, so you really only get the amount it says on the label if you give it a good shake before you pour. So when the carton says, "shake it up," you shouldn't do it just because the carton says so, or do it because I say so. You should do it because the science says so. The age of puberty for girls continues to decline. Last year, researchers published a study of more than 1,000 girls across the country and found a higher prevalence of onset of breast development among girls at ages 7 and 8 years old compared with those observed more than just a decade earlier. This has obvious psychosocial implications, but from a medical standpoint, the reason we're so concerned is that those who start developing at a younger age are at an increased risk of breast cancer later in life due to the increased estrogen exposure. For every year puberty can be delayed, risk of future breast cancer may drop 7%. A century ago, girls were starting their periods at around age 16, which may help explain why breast cancer is now such an epidemic. So what's contributing to this premature development? A new study last year following 3,000 girls found the single most important dietary determinant was how much meat girls eat. Meat intake, measured at 3 and 7 years, was strongly positively associated with starting their period by 12 years, 8 months. And so the trends in age at menarche in the West over the last century might reflect the trends in meat consumption. The second most powerful predictor was animal protein in general, so it wasn't just meat. The reason girls eating vegetarian have been found to develop more normally may also be influenced by their soy intake. Last year, a group of researchers calculated that girls drinking just like 2 cups of soy milk a week start developing breasts an average 8 months later than those who drink hardly any. Soy failed to have an effect, however, on timing of puberty in boys. The Dairy Council denies there's an association between milk and increased mucus production, and they blame it on the Jews. The original myth, they claim, stems from a 12th century Jewish physician. Not just any 12th century Jewish physician, though, but none other than Moses Maimonides himself. What have we learned in the last 800 years? The latest review on the subject was published last year. Does milk increase mucus production? Is that fact or fiction? It appears to be fact. The milk protein casein breaks down in the stomach to produce a substance called casomorphin, which, as its name implies, has opioid effects, which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, as species survival may depend on a close maternal bond between infant and mother. The guess is that opioid receptors on the mucus glands in the respiratory tract may respond to the casomorphin from milk, which could potentially stimulate the production and secretion of mucus from these respiratory glands. This may explain why a subgroup of the population who have increased respiratory tract mucus production find that many of their symptoms, including asthma, improve on a dairy elimination diet. Maybe Maimonides was right. The egg industry got their huevos handed to them last fall in a devastating review published in the Canadian Journal of Cardiology by 3 academic heavy hitters. David Spence is the director of the Stroke Prevention and Atherosclerosis Research Center, David Jenkins, the guy who invented the glycemic index, and Dr. Davignon, the director of the Hyperlipidemia and Atherosclerosis Research Group at the Montreal Institute for Clinical Research. The last time Dr. Spence spoke out publicly against eggs, his house got its cholesterol raised too. But the reason they felt the need to set the record straight is that recent media reports reflect the remarkable effectiveness of the sustained propaganda campaign of the egg producers' lobby to downplay the risks of cholesterol. The fundamental flaw of the studies the egg industry uses to muddy the waters on the issue is that they tend to only measure fasting cholesterol levels, which just reflects what's happening to your arteries for the last few hours of the night, not after you've eaten breakfast. Not only do eggs make your bad cholesterol go up, but for hours after you eat, dietary cholesterol increases the susceptibility of LDL, bad cholesterol, to oxidation, vascular inflammation, oxidative stress, and postprandial hyperlipidemia, and potentiates the harmful effects of saturated fat, impairs endothelial function, and increases cardiovascular events, meaning heart attacks. Dietary cholesterol may only increase our fasting cholesterol levels 10%, but it may increase the susceptibility of our bad cholesterol to oxidize by 37 to 39%, and that's what triggers much of the arterial inflammation that leads to the artery-clogging plaque development. So maybe an omelet might not be good, but how much dietary cholesterol is in just like one egg? A single egg yolk contains approximately 215 milligrams to 275 milligrams of cholesterol, depending on the size. The yolk of a large egg provides more than the 210 milligrams of cholesterol in a Hardee's Monster Thick Burger, which contains 2/3 of a pound of beef, 3 slices of cheese, and 4 strips of bacon. The media storm that followed compared an egg to the fast food monstrosity du jour, the KFC Double Down, where even the bun is made out of meat. What came worst, the chicken or the egg? A single egg yolk thus exceeds the recommended daily intake of cholesterol. So you could eat just like celery the whole rest of the day, and you could still be over the limit. Despite the harassment he's gotten, he remains unperturbed. He said egg yolks shouldn't be regarded as an item that's suitable for human diets, for anyone at risk of vascular disease, and you name me one person that isn't. The egg industry would rather blame the bacon or hash browns, railing against this myth that eggs are the most concentrated source of dietary cholesterol. And it's true. They're right. It is a myth. According to the official USDA nutrient database, in a list of the most concentrated cholesterol sources, eggs are not number 1, they're number 2. Brains are number 1. Veal brains, cow brains, pig brains, lamb brains, raw pig brains, more veal brains, and then eggs. Then more brains, eggs, brains, eggs, brains, eggs, and eggs. The take-home message: if you're going to do veal brains, pan-fried, definitely not braised. What about omega-3 rich eggs? The new type of eggs containing omega-3 fatty acids are still loaded with cholesterol. The director of the Stroke Prevention and Atherosclerosis Research Center notes, the answer is not to feed flaxseed to the chickens, but rather to put it on the cereal and leave the chicken out of the meal. The devastating new review published last year implicating egg consumption did not go over easy with the egg industry. They countered that the overly restrictive 200 milligram upper safety limit for cholesterol intake that wouldn't even allow a single egg is only for people at risk for heart disease, to which the lead researcher replied, most everyone is at risk of vascular disease. The only ones who could eat an egg yolk regularly with impunity would be those who expect to die prematurely from non-vascular causes. In other words, his famous, the only people who should eat eggs regularly are those with a terminal illness, because at that point, who cares? You're going to drop dead anyway. In their landmark review, they conclude that waiting until your first stroke, heart attack, or diabetes diagnosis to avoid eggs is too late. They conclude stopping egg consumption after a heart attack or stroke would be like quitting smoking after a diagnosis of lung cancer, a necessary action, but late. The egg industry loves to boast that eggs have these 2 compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin, that appear so protective against cataracts and macular degeneration. What the industry does is feed hens yellow corn, alfalfa, even marigold petals, anything to boost the egg content up to 166 micrograms per large egg. So they say, don't worry about the whole cholesterol thing, eat eggs to protect your sight. Eggs can actually have up to 250 micrograms. A cup of carrots, though, has over 1,000, a single serving of collard greens closer to 15,000, and a serving of kale tops the chart at nearly 24,000. One spoonful of spinach has as much as 9 eggs, one spoonful. For eye protection, the recommendation is to get 10,000 a day. So that's like a third cup of spinach, or 40 eggs, more than 3 cartons of eggs a day, every day. That's nutrition unscrambled? Here are the top 10 sources of these critical eyesight-saving nutrients. All greens. Eggs don't even make the top 100. To get to eggs, you have to scroll down a couple pages, and according to the USDA, come in right behind Captain Crunch with Crunch Berries. There are more phytonutrients in Crunch Berries than there are in eggs. The reason the peacock looks like this and the peahen looks like this is because of sexual selection. The females prefer males with the most elaborate displays. How does this make sense evolutionarily? How can appearance offer insight into the health of a potential mate? Having such ornate, excessive plumage is risky. The poor peacock can barely get off the ground, and this is hardly effective camouflage against predators. And so the fact that the peacock could survive despite such costly ornamentation offers a sense of how robust the bird's genetics must be. So natural selection might favor females attracted to that sort of thing. So are you just born attractive or not? Well, some species use diet to increase their sexual attractiveness. Great tits prefer carotenoid-rich caterpillars, which play a role in plumage pigmentation. Their breasts become brighter yellow, which is more attractive to potential mates, and a signal how good they may be at procuring food, and is a reflection of their health status, since yellow carotenoids like lutein are so health-promoting. So scientists wondered if the same phenomenon could be found in the human species. Published in the International Journal of Primatology, facial skin coloration affects perceived health of human faces. The face plays a significant role in human interactions, including mate choice. So the researchers took digital photographs of Caucasian men and women and allowed people to turn a dial to manipulate various color values until they came up with what they perceived to be the healthiest-looking color, and both men and women preferred increased yellow, the proverbial golden glow. In other words, greens to be gorgeous. We suggest that the healthy appearance of skin yellowness may be attributable to dietary carotenoid deposition in the skin. This suggests that carotenoids, which are involved in health signaling and sexual selection in many species of birds and fish, may also affect the appearance of health in humans. In fact, it's a popular view that sun tanning enhances the healthy and attractive appearance of Caucasian faces, but this research suggests that any benefit to health appearance from tanning is due to the associated increase in skin yellowness, and that if you separate it out, people actually prefer the lighter but yellower skin. So better than a tanning bed to improve our healthfulness and attractiveness is a bed of greens. If dietary carotenoids contribute to a normal, healthy skin color, why not just go for the quick fix and take a pill? Because it doesn't work. A paper published last year looked at how effective kale was at increasing carotenoid concentration in the skin. As you can see, compared to placebo, there was a significant rise in carotenoid concentration in both the forehead and the palm during kale supplementation. And you can see that they were still significantly above baseline even 2 weeks after they stopped the kale. What if instead of the sugar pill, though, you compared kale to beta-carotene pills, lutein pills, mixed carotenoid pills? They didn't work. Here are the 3 carotenoid supplements, each mixed in with the placebo. Nothing happened. And here's them mixed in with the samples of kale. The answer is produce, not pills. They conclude that the higher increase in the skin may possibly be caused by the fact that the antioxidant substances in the skin act as a network, protecting each other against degradation caused by free radicals. Vegetables, fruit, and natural extracts, which contain a cocktail of different carotenoids, protect tissues such as the skin more efficiently than high doses of single synthetic carotenoids. This indicates that the antioxidants in the skin protect each other in an antioxidative network. They all work together in greens to help keep your skin healthy and beautiful. The second thing researchers found in trying to understand what makes some people's faces more attractive than others is that in addition to finding men and women prefer a tint of yellow in Caucasian faces, to enhance healthy appearance, people also increased skin redness, the proverbial rosy glow, in both men and women. This makes sense evolutionarily. Increased skin vascularization increases skin pinkness and is associated with increased physical fitness, but is impaired in patients with type 2 diabetes, hypertension. Increased blood oxygenation, associated with increased aerobic fitness, increases blood redness. Skin blood deoxygenation is associated with cardiac and respiratory illness, and causes a dull blue tint to the skin, so it makes sense that we should prefer mates with a rosy glow. This may explain why we lost the bone in our penis. There are certain genetic diseases that affect 100% of the human population, and one, extending to 100% of human males, is the congenital lack of a baculum, or penile bone. Whereas most mammals and most other primates have a bone in their penis, including all the old world primates, all the great apes, including our ancestors. But over the last 6 or 7 million years, we lost it. Maybe, thinks evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, due to sexual selection by females looking for an honest advertisement of good health in prospective mates. Since human males lack this bone and must rely solely on fluid hydraulics to maintain erections, erection failure is a sensitive early warning of cardiovascular disease. It is not implausible that, with natural selection refining their diagnostic skills, females could glean all sorts of clues about a male's health and the robustness of his ability to cope with stress from the tone and bearing of his penis. Without a bone, then only genuinely healthy or strong males could present a really stiff erection, and the females could make an unobstructed diagnosis. Yet another reason to eat a heart-healthy diet. Sexual selection may have also played a role in penis size. According to the best available science, 3/4 of women find both penile length and girth somewhat or very important. What does this have to do with diet? Phthalates. Phthalates are chemical compounds that are used in a wide range of consumer products, including pesticides, paints, PVC plastic. However, the contribution of dietary intake to phthalate exposure has not been well defined until now. But what's the problem with phthalate exposure? Effects on sexual health and development have been observed in recent human studies. We've known phthalates affect the genital development of lab rats, but for the first time ever, human data has been published. Simple study, they measured the levels of phthalates flowing through the bodies of pregnant women, and then later measured the size and characteristics of their infant son's genitalia after birth between ages 2 months to 3 years. The women who had the most phthalate exposure had up to 10 times the odds of giving birth to sons with one or both testicles incompletely descended, their scrotum characterized as small and or not distinct from surrounding tissue, and a significant smaller penile volume, a measure of penis size taking into account both length and girth. In other words, the more phthalates pregnant women are exposed to, the increased likelihood of testicular maldescent, a small and indistinct scrotum, and smaller penis size. They conclude these changes in male infants associated with prenatal exposure to some of the same phthalate metabolites that cause similar alterations in male rodents suggest that commonly used phthalates may undervirialize humans as well. So what foods should pregnant women stay away from to avoid the phthalate-related syndrome of incomplete virialization? The urine levels of thousands of Americans all across the country were measured, along with their diets, to find out which food most significantly associated with phthalate body burden. They looked at dairy, they looked at eggs, fish, fruit, poultry, potatoes, tomatoes, vegetables in general, and red meat. Statistically, the most significant result in their analysis was poultry consumption. So, for example, in one analysis, while total dairy consumption was significantly associated with one of the phthalate chemicals called MCPP, and eggs with another, MEHP, poultry consumption was a significant predictor of levels of all the individual DEHP metabolites, MEHP, MEHP, MEOHP, MECCP, etc., 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 suggesting that an increase of 1 ounce of poultry per day is associated with an increase in one of the phthalate metabolite levels of approximately 5.7%. A single chicken breast is nearly 8 ounces. Maybe it was just leaching into the meat from the plastic wrap packaging? Probably not. The finding that egg consumption is significantly associated with levels of phthalates too suggests that chickens themselves may be contaminated, and that food is not being contaminated just through packaging and processing. So, if there is one thing pregnant women may want to avoid during pregnancy to protect their son's normal development, it would be to avoid poultry. What about all the other industrial pollutants like PCBs? In perhaps the largest study to date, more than 12,000 food and feed samples tested across 18 countries, in the 11,000 food samples tested, the highest mean contamination level was observed in fish and eggs. Fish and fish-derived products, followed by eggs, milk and their products, and then meat and meat products from land-based animals. The lowest contamination was observed in foods of plant origin. That is reason enough right there to transition towards a plant-based diet. Here's the data. Fish oil, just off the charts, 117 mics per kg. Fish meat, 35. Eggs, with quantifiable levels found in 94% of eggs tested. Dairy, beef, pork, chicken, and then plant foods, 0.08. The breast cancer you may feel one day as a lump in the shower may have started 20 years before. We now suspect that all the epithelial cancers, breast, colon, lung, pancreas, prostate, ovarian, the ones that cause the vast majority of cancer deaths, may have been growing for up to 20 years or more. By the time it's picked up, it may have already been growing, maturing, scheming for years, acquiring hundreds of new survival of the fittest mutations to grow even quicker, better undermine our immune system. So-called early detection, like mammogram, is really, really late detection. People are considered healthy until they show symptoms, but if we've been harboring a malignancy for 20 years, we may feel all right, but we haven't been. So many people who do the right thing and improve their diet in hopes of preventing cancer may very well at that very moment be treating it as well. Cancer prevention and treatment may sometimes be the same thing. What new developments are there in the battle against breast cancer? Well, most breast tumors are estrogen receptor positive, meaning that they respond to estrogen. Estrogen makes them grow. The problem for tumors in postmenopausal women is that there isn't much estrogen around, unless, of course, you take it in a drug like Premarin, made from pregnant mare's urine. found not to affect the quality of women's lives, just the quantity, increasing the risk of strokes, heart attacks, blood clots, and breast cancer. Thankfully, millions of women stopped taking it in 2002, and we saw a nice dip in breast cancer rates, but unfortunately those rates have since stagnated. Hundreds of thousands of American women continue to get this dreaded diagnosis every year, so what's next? Well, with no estrogen around, many breast tumors devise a nefarious plan. They'll just make their own. 70% of breast cancer cells synthesize estrogen themselves using an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen, blue to pink. And so drug companies have produced a number of aromatase inhibitor drugs that are used as chemotherapy agents. Of course, by the time you're on chemo, it can be too late, so researchers started screening hundreds of natural dietary components in hopes of finding something that targets this enzyme. Now, to do this, you need a lot of human tissue. Where are you going to get it from? To study skin, for example, researchers used discarded human foreskins. They're just being thrown away, might as well use them. Where are you going to get discarded female tissue, though? Placentas, human placentas. So they got a bunch of women to donate their placentas after giving birth to further this critical line of research. And after years of searching, they found 7 vegetables with significant anti-aromatase activity, and here they are. 7 different vegetables dropping aromatase activity about 20%, except for this one. That's like a 60–65% inhibition. Which one was it? Was it the bell pepper, broccoli, carrots, celery, green onions, mushrooms, or spinach? Well, it wasn't green onions, not celery, not carrots, not peppers, nor broccoli, which would have been my guess, not spinach, but X marks the spot, mushrooms. In this landmark study to find out which vegetable was best at suppressing the activity of the enzyme used by breast cancer cells to undermine our defenses, mushrooms came out number 1. But that was just for plain white mushrooms. If that's how regular mushrooms roll, then think how good the exotic varieties may do. So they put them to the test, comparing regular mushrooms to wood ear, criminy, oyster mushrooms, Italian brown, enoki, button mushrooms, which are just baby versions of regular white mushrooms, stuffing mushrooms, which are just big white mushrooms, shiitake, chanterelle, and portobello. We already know what this one is here. Remember, 60–65% drop. White mushrooms, the original. Most of these other mushrooms are stuck up there in celery carrot land, but one beat out our regular fungi. Which one do you think it was? Wood ear, criminy, oyster, Italian brown, enoki, button, stuffing, shiitake, chanterelle, or portobello. I never would have guessed this one. Better than plain white mushrooms? Big plain white mushrooms. In conclusion, these studies suggest the daily intake of the common white button mushroom may have a significant cancer preventive effect with regard to breast cancer development. White button mushrooms are relatively inexpensive and readily available in markets across the United States, and therefore are a feasible addition to any dietary plan. A Harvard study of what tens of thousands of women ate in high school found that dietary intake of fiber and nuts during adolescence influences subsequent risk of breast disease, and may suggest a viable means for breast cancer prevention. And the protection from nuts was independent of fiber. Results for nuts were essentially the same with additional adjustment for fiber, suggesting that in addition to fiber, the inverse associations between nut intake and proliferative benign breast disease risk may also be attributable to nutrients other than fiber in nuts. Nuts, after all, are packed with vitamins and minerals. Wouldn't it be easier, though, then just to take a multivitamin than eating all that PB&J? Last year, a study of 35,000 women was published on the association between multivitamin use and breast cancer rates. Many women use multivitamins in the belief that these supplements will prevent chronic diseases, such as cancer and cardiovascular disease. However, Whether the use of multivitamins affects the risk of breast cancer is unclear. Well, it just got clearer. What do you think they found? Multivitamins for breast cancer prevention harmful, harmless, or helpful? 40% of women in the United States take a multivitamin, spending $4 billion to do so. Is this money well spent? Is this just a waste of money? No, it's worse. Women taking multivitamins are in fact paying to increase their risk. Conclusion: these results suggest that multivitamin use is associated with an increased risk of breast cancer. The researchers suggest it may be the folic acid that's the culprit, something I talked about in a previous video, whereas the doubling of prostate cancer risk tied to multivitamin use is thought to be due to the zinc content. From the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine last year, should healthy people take a multivitamin? No. At least it won't hurt may not be true. Earlier this year, a study was published comparing the hormonal levels of women with and without breast cancer. If estrogen makes most breast cancers grow, then one would expect that the level of estrogen would be higher in women who have breast cancer compared to women who don't, or at least who don't yet. And indeed, no surprise, that's what they found: significantly more estradiol freely circulating through the bloodstream of those with breast cancer. But the study also looked at diets and hormonal levels. These were all omnivores. The women eating vegetarian did even better. This may help explain why, in a study of the relative risks for breast cancer by levels of animal product consumption, there appears to be a trend between lower breast cancer risk the more vegetarian someone eats. And it was researchers at my medical alma mater, Tufts, that figured out why in a landmark article published in the New England Journal of Medicine. See, the way our bodies get rid of excess cholesterol is to dump it into the digestive tract, knowing full well that there'll be lots of fiber in there to grab it, hold on to it, and flush it out the body, though hopefully you chew a little bit better than that. We did, after all, evolve quite a long time before Twinkies and Wonder Bread and the ascension of royal establishments such as Burger King and Dairy Queen. So our body just expects it. It just assumes our intestines are going to be packed with fiber all day long, 7 times more than what we're getting now. We did evolve eating some meat, but plants don't tend to run as fast, and so the bulk of our diets was made up of a lot of bulk. And that's how your body gets rid of excess estrogen. Vegetarian women have increased fiber input, which leads to vegetarian women having an increased fecal output, which leads to increased excretion of estrogen and a decreased blood concentration of estrogen. And this wasn't just in theory, they measured it. Subjects were provided with plastic bags and insulated boxes filled with dry ice for 3 24-hour fecal collections. You've heard of popsicles? Well, they had them make more like poopsicles. And here you go. In any one 24-hour period, the vegetarians were fecally excreting more than twice as much estrogen than the omnivores. And measuring the estrogen excretion versus the size of the fecal output, you can see the bigger the better. See the heavyweight V's versus the welterweight O's? No wonder vegetarian women in the United States have been found to have such lower rates of breast cancer. It's great that many women stopped hormone replacement therapy, stopped taking extra estrogens. Well, another way to rid yourself of excess estrogens is in the way nature intended. The bigger our bowel movements, the healthier we may be. The risk of low stool weight includes bowel cancer, diverticular disease, appendicitis, various anal diseases, even perhaps the healthfulness of breast tissue. From a study of 23 populations across a dozen countries, a graph of average daily stool weight versus colon cancer incidence. As you can see, once you get down around half a pound, 200 grams or so, colon cancer rates really seem to skyrocket. And once people start dropping quarter-pounders, colon cancer incidence quadruples. The link between stool size and colon cancer may be related to transit time, the number of hours it takes for food to go from mouth to anus. The larger our stool, the quicker the transit time, the easier it is for our intestines to move things along. People don't realize you can have daily bowel movements and still be effectively constipated. You can be regular, but 5 days late. What you're flushing today, you may have eaten last week. If you want to test it for yourself, all you need to do is eat a big bowl of beets and see when things turn pretty and pink. And ideally, it should be down in the 24 to 36-hour range to reach that half-pound target. How long it takes food to get from one end to the other depends on gender and eating style. If you're a vegetarian male, it should just be a day or two, though if you eat meat, it could end up being 5 days. Female vegetarians also mostly 1 or 2 days, but those who eat meat are most likely looking at 4 days. If it's just 24, 36 hours, your daily stool weight, which is what's flushing out all that excess estrogen and cholesterol, is probably going to hit that half-pound target, though if it's a couple days, you'll likely never make it. Now, if you have a really good bathroom scale, you can measure stool weight directly to see if you hit that half-pound minimum by, of course, weighing yourself before and after. Who's number 1? At number 2. The country with the largest average bowel movements? Denmark, India, Japan, New Zealand, South Africa, Tonga, an island in the South Pacific, the UK, or the US of A. Remember, the target minimum fecal output is 200 grams a day, about half a pound. And the winner of the Bowels of the Earth contest was Tonga at 531. The only other country to make the 200 target was India, who gets the silver at 311, with individual measurements ranging up to 1,505 grams. That's more than 3 pounds a day. That's impressive. And the bronze goes to Japan at 195, almost made the cutoff. Everyone else fell short, though, with the smallest stools in the world colored red, white, and blue. U.S. vegetarians fared better, though, as did vegetarian and especially vegan Brits. There actually was one population that did even worse than the standard American diet. The smallest average population bowel movement size ever recorded, New Yorkers. That's less than 3 ounces a day. Instead of just living there, if only they would actually eat a big apple once in a while. On the other end of the spectrum, though, what are they eating in Tonga? Well, this was recorded decades ago when they were still eating their traditional plant-based diet of taro, greens, sweet potatoes, fruit, more greens, bananas, cabbage, etc. Now, tragically, the most frequently consumed food item in the country is imported chicken parts. And this is what happened. From one of the healthiest nations in the world to one of the most obese, thanks in part to the westernization of their diets. In one of my videos last year, I reported on the finding that vegetarian men and women had significantly better scores on the Depression Anxiety Stress Scale. Why were vegetarians significantly less depressed, anxious, and stressed than even healthy meat eaters in the study? Negligible arachidonic acid intake may help explain the favorable mood profile observed with vegetarian diets. As I talked about last year, this arachidonic acid stuff in our diet produces inflammatory compounds, which may inflame our brain. The omnivores ate 9 times as much arachidonic acid than the vegetarians, which is not surprising given that arachidonic acid is not found in plants. That's why vegetarians and vegans have significantly lower levels of arachidonic acid flowing through their bloodstream. In fact, you can even measure it right out of saliva. They found significantly lower levels of arachidonic acid in vegetarian drool. This was a landmark study, but it was also just a cross-sectional study, a snapshot in time. To prove cause and effect, they really needed to do an interventional study, so they did. Presented at the American Public Health Association conference, they took a bunch of meat eaters and split them up into 3 groups. The control group maintained regular intake of flesh foods, the second group ate fish but no other meat, and the third was put on a vegetarian diet with no eggs. The whole study only lasted 2 weeks, but what do you think they found? If it was primarily the saturated fat inflaming the omnivore's brain, then the moods of both the veg and fish groups would presumably improve. If arachidonic acid was the culprit, then presumably only the veg group would feel significantly better. This is the amount of arachidonic acid, in blue, consumed per day by the end of the study. The fish eaters were eating a lot more of those long-chain omega-3s, though, EPA and DHA, so maybe they were protected, even though they were consuming all that arachidonic acid in fish. Or maybe no one would experience a change in mood at all in such a short time frame, just 2 weeks. Sometimes it takes drugs months to have an effect. Here's what they found. In terms of psychological benefits, the egg-free vegetarian group significantly improved, meaning greater reductions in both the Depression Anxiety Stress Scale and the Profile of Mood States, a measurement of mood disturbance. Though the no-poultry fish group did marginally better than the control group, the difference was not statistically significant. Conclusion: the complete restriction of flesh food significantly reduced mood variability in omnivores. Our results suggest that a vegetarian diet can reduce mood variability in omnivores. Perhaps eating less meat can help protect mood in omnivores, particularly important in those susceptible to mood disorders. The pro-inflammatory metabolites of arachidonic acid from animal products are involved in more than just neuroinflammation. They also appear to play a role in cancer, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune disorders. For example, last year we discovered eating a lot of arachidonic acid may quadruple our risk of developing the inflammatory bowel disease ulcerative colitis. The anti-inflammatory effects of a low arachidonic acid diet may help explain why patients with rheumatoid arthritis improve on a vegetarian diet. It's funny, there was a arthritis study done where they put half the people on a vegetarian diet for a year, and they were saying how they were worried that for some patients it may be difficult to change from an omnivorous diet to a strict vegetarian diet. They expected some people may have felt a decreased quality of life when they had to renounce ordinary food. Furthermore, a strict vegetarian diet can put a strain on a patient's social life. Therefore, one could envisage that the psychological distress experienced by the newly vegetarian would increase during the study. On the contrary, though, they found that the patients put on the vegetarian diet had a significantly better improvement in their GHQ-20 scores compared to the omnivorous patients, which is a measure of psychological health. Those eating vegetarian also became less depressed and less anxious? That was not what they expected. Now, this could be a function of the vegetarians eating less arachidonic acid, but another possibility is that the patients in the vegetarian group experienced less psychological distress because of the clinical improvement. Maybe they felt better because they got better. Or as they put it, it is reasonable to assume that less pain, shorter duration of morning stiffness, better grip strength, and less disability would impose less psychological distress on the patients. Inflammation isn't always bad. When you get a splinter or cut yourself, the wound can get all red, hot, swollen, painful, pussy. Inflammation is one way our bodies fight off infection. So we do need some arachidonic acid to trigger the inflammatory cascade, but we don't need to eat any, since our bodies make all we need. For carnivores like cats, arachidonic acid is an essential nutrient. Since they're eating animals all day, they get it preformed in their diet, so their bodies never needed to make any. We, however, evolved from plant-eating apes, and so we evolved to make it ourselves. It's like cholesterol. Our bodies need some cholesterol, so our bodies make all we need. There's no need to take in extra through our diet, and in fact, too much cholesterol is a bad thing. The same thing may be true with arachidonic acid. If you want to try to stay away from this stuff, these are the top 10 sources in the American diet. As you can see, overwhelmingly chicken and eggs. So even semi-vegetarians can drop their levels down, though one would have to eat vegan to optimally minimize one's intake. How vegan does one have to eat, though, to sufficiently lower our level of arachidonic acid intake? I mean, our body's already making some. Is eating just like 1 egg a day going to significantly increase our blood levels? We didn't know until last year. This group of Japanese researchers gave women just 1 egg's worth a day, and found that dietary arachidonic acid increased the arachidonic acid level in all fat fractions of the blood, even at a very low dietary dose. Now, the meat industry realizes this is a problem, and they're currently exploring ways to genetically manipulate chickens to lower arachidonic acid levels in chicken muscle to produce meat with health benefits. The egg industry appears to be getting even more desperate, feeding laying hens seal blubber. See, the annual Canadian seal hunt evidently produces 16,000 tons of blubber every year, which can be used for animal feed. And indeed, if you feed laying hens diets containing 5% seal blubber, you can drop the arachidonic acid levels in eggs to as much as 34%, making eggs significantly less harmful. Any amount, though, in chicken and eggs is in excess of what our body needs. Making arachidonic acid is like playing with fire. Our body makes just enough and no more. The kernel and the clubber may want to feed us a little extra, but our own body knows best. In one of my videos last year, I noted that the fish oil distillation process was found ineffective at removing all the industrial contaminants from fish oil, so even quote-unquote PCB-free fish oil may be anything but. Isn't there a law in California, though, that makes it illegal to sell toxic substances that cause cancer or birth defects without at least a warning label? I've never seen such a label on fish oil, and neither did the Environmental Justice Foundation, so they sued CVS, GNC, Rite Aid, along with the major fish oil manufacturers. To do so, of course, they had to prove the fish oil you find in stores actually contains PCBs, so they went out and grabbed 10 and tested them. Some had 70 times the PCBs of others, and 240 times the toxicity. This is why we should get our long-chain omega-3s without any risk of toxins by choosing microalgae or yeast-based EPA-DHA supplements. Nutritionally equivalent, a safe and convenient source without the toxic waste. Earlier this year, Consumer Reports published some new tests on tuna, confirming that just a single serving, like half a can of white tuna, would put women of childbearing age over the EPA mercury safety limit. Light tuna tends to have less than white tuna, but they've found sometimes it can have twice as much. Bottom line, they recommend children and premenopausal women eat no more than a can a week, and pregnant women should avoid canned tuna entirely. Last year, scientists at the Harvard School of Public Health attempted to calculate what effect a reduction of mercury intake might have for our population, given that methylmercury is a known human developmental neurotoxicant, as well as may increase fatal heart attack risks. They calculated that if we could just drop our mercury exposure down 10%, we could save our country $860 million a year, most of which would be associated with reductions in fatal heart attacks, and the rest with IQ gains. The CDC estimates that every extra IQ point we have translates into about 1% future higher earnings in life, in terms of hourly wages. So lowering our mercury intake is healthy for our brain and bank account. On a practical level, what does reducing our exposure mean? Well, we can try not to live next to a volcano or coal-fired power plant, but fish consumption is the major source of methylmercury intake. The most common cause of adult-onset epilepsy in the world is called neurocysticercosis, which literally means pork tapeworms curled up inside our brain. A review last year out of the Mayo Clinic describes the problem. Cysticerci, meaning the pork tapeworm larvae, create cavities in the human brain and other body tissue where their tiny bodies grow, sometimes into tapeworms 2 to 7 meters in length, and can live up to 25 years in the human body. 7 meters means 23 feet long. On MRI, so-called wormholes appear. On CT scan, there can be so many in the brain at one time, it can appear similar to a starry sky. Each star is a fluid-filled cyst with the beginning of a living, growing tapeworm inside. This is what they look like on autopsy. This is what their face looks like. They have these rings of hooks to grab onto our brain tissue. Earlier this year, a review was published by the CDC on the public health implications of cysticercosis acquired in the United States. Pork tapeworms on the brain has emerged as a cause of severe neurologic disease in the United States. Even after pork tapeworm larvae infect our brain, some people remain asymptomatic their entire lives, while others can go for years without symptoms, and then suddenly become very ill with seizures, headaches, and other focal neurological deficits as the larvae multiply within the nervous system and other tissues, and can cause sudden death, just due to the pressure buildup in the brain. Another review last year confirmed that pork tapeworms taking residence inside our brains is a significant public health issue within the United States. At first, though, clinical diagnosis can be challenging. Initial presentations of the disease are often vague, complaints like headaches, weakness, dizziness, high blood pressure. In terms of treatment, in a series of more than 100 cases published this year, although antiparasitic deworming drugs were found to be effective, about 10% of victims require brain surgery, what's called an open craniotomy, where you have to go in and basically just dig them out. They can get into our muscles too. This is an X-ray of someone's leg, and you can see how infested the muscle is, and that's why we can get it from pork, because it gets into muscles. But what if you don't eat pig muscles? Well, to all the smug pork eaters out there, if we can find pork tapeworms in the brains of Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn, we can find pork tapeworms in anyone. They weren't sneaking off for schnitzel, it was their pork-eating domestic houseworkers preparing their food. When 1,700 members of the local synagogue were tested, 1% tested positive. The researchers suggested that those to be employed as domestic workers or food handlers should be screened for tapeworm infection via examination of 3 stool samples for tapeworm eggs. So to avoid the #1 cause of adult-onset epilepsy, we may want to not eat pork and not eat anything made by anyone who eats pork. The top killers in the United States are heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Number 5, accidents. Number 9, kidney disease. Number 13, high blood pressure. Then Parkinson's disease. Over the last 50 years, they've all stayed relatively stable, except this one, starting out of nowhere just a few decades ago, and now is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. What is it? Alzheimer's disease. Last year was the 7th leading cause of death, this year the 6th. Keeps creeping up. Over the last decade or so, we've been making some progress on some of the other top killers, but not Alzheimer's. Enter the saffron crocus. Saffron in the treatment of patients with Alzheimer's disease. It was a double-blind, randomized trial measuring cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's patients, comparing saffron to placebo. Saffron is the female reproductive organs of the saffron flower, which we can buy as a spice. So what did they find? You give Alzheimer's patients placebo capsules, and as you can see, their cognitive dysfunction gets worse over time. That's what happens in Alzheimer's. You get worse and worse until you die. Unless, it appears, you spice up your life with a little saffron. Conclusion: this double-blind, placebo-controlled study suggests that, at least in the short term, 16 weeks, saffron is both safe and effective in mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. Larger confirmatory randomized controlled trials are called for urgently, given the devastation wrought by this disease. But even if this study was a total fluke, what's the downside of adding a little saffron to our diet, a spice that's been cooked with for 3,500 years? I don't know about you, but God forbid if anyone in my family were ever diagnosed with this disease horror, I'd be cooking them some paella. The spice saffron beat out placebo in this randomized double-blind study, but Alzheimer's patients aren't on sugar pills. They're on drugs like donepezil, sold as Aricept. If some drug company wanted to release a new drug, they'd have to compare it not to placebo, but to the current leading treatment. And why should it be any different with flowers? A 22-week, multi-center, randomized, double-blind, controlled trial of saffron in the treatment of mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. Saffron versus Aricept, the leading drug. Here are the results. In a graph of cognitive dysfunction, the circles are saffron, the triangles are the leading drug. That costs about $2,000 a year and associated with all sorts of side effects. Can you tell the difference? Saffron worked just as well as Aricept, which is to say, not very well at all. But remember what untreated Alzheimer's patients look like? They get worse. The reason drugs are prescribed is just to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's, so we still have a long way to go, but saffron appeared to work just as well as the leading drug, and without the side effects. For me, the most disturbing finding in the latest update last year on the status of nutrition education in U.S. medical schools was that, compared to the last survey in 2004, the percentage of medical school instructors who think more nutrition education was even necessary dropped from about 9 out of 10 down to about 8 out of 10. Is it possible that doctors think they know more than they do? Doctors may think they know enough about nutrition, but do they? Doctors were asked a list of simple questions about diet and cardiovascular disease, some simpler than others. True or false? Does walking and gardening increase physical activity levels? 95% got that right. Good. On the other hand, 71% of health professionals and final-year medical students incorrectly thought avocados had cholesterol in them. But how did they do overall? What was the average test score of doctors on questions relating to diet and cardiovascular disease? Did they get an A+, 97 to 100% correct? If so, maybe they don't need any more nutrition training. Or did they just get an A, A-, B, C, D, or an F even, less than 65% correct? What do you think? They didn't get an A, B, or C, nor even a D. 64% correct, they failed. I've covered high-fat plant foods in the past, such as nuts, which are health-promoting, coconut oil, which is not so health-promoting, but what about avocados? 75% calories from fat, but good for you nonetheless, neither good nor bad, or something we should consider avoiding. Well, rats fed the human equivalent of 200 pounds of avocado seeds don't do so well, but we're not rats, and who eats avocado pits? Then, of course, the FDA warns about the toxicity of avocado leaves for the lactating mammary gland of the goat. But what about the actual fruit? Not good for pets, evidently, but then again, neither is chocolate. What about the actual fruit for actual humans? We've been eating avocados for 10,000 years, the darling of health nuts everywhere. What could possibly go wrong? Well, they're not a problem for cholesterol. In fact, people put on an avocado diet see a significant improvement in their cholesterol, probably in part due to its phytosterol content. The California Avocado Commission even supported a study pitting, no pun intended, avocados against a malignant line of oral cancer cells. Here's the control. The red dots indicate living mitochondria inside the cells, the little sparks of life force, extinguished by an avocado extract, leaving dead, lifeless husks of cancer cells in its wake. Kills breast cancer cells too. There's a natural plant toxin produced by the avocado tree and found in avocado fruit that acts as a fungicide, an insecticide, and can do a number on human breast cancer cells. And here they are. These are not what we want in our body. These are 3 breast cancer cells huddled together, planning their route of attack. This is a different stain than used before. The red is their nucleus, and the green is their cytoskeleton, the cell's skeleton. Didn't know cells had skeletons? How else could they move? How else could a breast cancer cell get from the breast to the brain or to the liver? It crawls there. Here's a video of breast cancer cells in a lab working their way through a maze researchers set up for them, using their cellular skeletons to pull themselves along. But that's what chemotherapy is for. This is what the chemo drug paclitaxel can do. Clumps up their cytoskeleton, so the cells can't move, can't divide. And the avocado toxin can do the exact same thing, stopping breast cancer cells in their tracks. The researchers conclude that persin, the avocado toxin, should be further evaluated as a single-agent or combination chemotherapy agent for cancers of the breast and potentially other cancers as well. Look what this toxin does to cancer cell DNA. This is a measure of DNA fragmentation. The avocado compound rips their chromosomes limb from limb. Unfortunately, it turns out it appears to do the same thing to normal cells, too. Published just last year, an in vitro evaluation of the genotoxicity of avocado fruit in human white blood cells. This study was not funded by the Avocado Commission, maybe Big Salsa's trying to muscle in on the guac market. Simple experiment. They took normal human cells, and the easiest way to get human cells is just take a blood sample. It's kind of the easy way out. That's what I did for my research work at Cornell. Then they took some avocado fruit, smooshed it up, dripped a little bit on some healthy human white blood cells in a petri dish, and looked to see if it caused any DNA damage. It was not subtle. This is what normal, healthy human chromosomes look like. This is your DNA. This is your DNA on guacamole. Chromosomes literally broken in half, terminal deletions, disjunctions, translocation, all sorts of weird chromosomal abnormalities. This is the kind of thing carcinogens do. Conclusion. Their studies suggest that extracts of avocado fruit can potentially induce significant genomic instability and some genetic damage in human white blood cells. Why do they say potentially induce? I mean, we could see it with our own eyes. Because it was an in vitro evaluation. These were human cells, but they were outside the body. Even people that love guacamole don't shoot it up like heroin, you eat it. So before it gets near our blood cells, it hits stomach acid, then digestive enzymes. Then our liver is a carcinogen detoxifying machine. And only then do food compounds get to circulate throughout our body. So we don't know what happens when we just eat it, but if the same effect occurs on body cells in vivo, meaning inside the body, then it could result in loss of function, cell death, or transformation into cancer. And if it did the same thing to our sperm or eggs, it could lead to infertility, abortions, miscarriages, or birth defects. The bottom line, we don't know what avocado consumption can do inside the body, but until the jury is in, I think it's reasonable, given these new data, for people to consider reducing their intake. Medicare is in trouble. Where or where could we possibly save some money? Well, according to the American Heart Association, cardiovascular disease alone costs us $500 billion a year. So, no wonder, in one of the most exciting developments in lifestyle medicine, last year, Medicare officially approved for reimbursement the Ornish program for reversing heart disease and the Pritikin program. Hospitals can now get paid for reversing heart disease instead of just queuing people up for their next bypass operation after their last graft got clogged up too. Now, most people have heard of Dean Ornish, but may not be aware of Nathan Pritikin, the original lifestyle medicine pioneer who started reversing heart disease with diet back in the 1970s. In fact, on a personal note, Pritikin is the reason this little freckled fellow went to medical school. I think the spark for many kids to want to become a doctor when they grow up is watching a grandparent get sick or even die, but for me, it was my grandma getting better. This is my grandma at her grandson's wedding, 15 years after doctors had abandoned her to die. She'd already had a couple bypass operations that ran out of arteries. There was nothing more they could do. Wheelchair-bound, crushing chest pain, and then she heard about Pritikin. If anyone needed heart disease reversal, Pritikin's like a live-in program. You stay for a few weeks, they put you on a plant-based diet, teach you to cook, etc. They wheeled her in, and she walked out. I'll never forget that. And for a kid, that's all that matters. You get to play with grandma again. Right? She was given her medical death sentence at age 65. And thanks to a healthy diet, she was able to enjoy another 28 years on this earth with her 6 grandkids, including me. She's even mentioned in the official Pritikin biography, The Man Who Healed America's Heart. These were the death's door people, said an early administrator, like Frances Greger. Arrived in a wheelchair, Mrs. Greger had heart disease, angina, claudication. Her condition was so bad she could no longer walk without great pain in her chest and legs. Within 3 weeks, though, she was not only out of her wheelchair, but was walking 10 miles a day. In the end, my grandma's miraculous recovery from terminal heart disease through diet and exercise, remarkable as it was, is just one anecdote among many. Though it inspired me to pursue a career in medicine, I've always had a skeptical streak and just wasn't convinced until Ornish's landmark study in 1990 clobbered me over the head with enough science to change my own diet forever. Pritikin had been reversing heart disease with a plant-based diet for years before Ornish came along, but here it was, in black and white, in one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Ornish proved you cannot just slow heart disease, our #1 killer, not just stop heart disease in its tracks, but actually reverse heart disease, open up clogged arteries, and without drugs, without surgery. Since then, millions upon millions have died totally unnecessary deaths. If my grandma didn't have to die like that, no one's grandmother has to die. We have the miracle cure, yet hardly anyone knows about it. Wait a second, though. If we can reverse heart disease without drugs, without surgery, then great. Doesn't that mean we can eat whatever the heck we want, and then, as soon as we start feeling a little chest pain, we can get with the program, eat as healthy as we need to, and open our arteries back up, getting to enjoy not only our grandchildren, but also happy memories of years of bacon and eggs, cheese, and fried chicken. Here's the problem with the plan: sudden cardiac death. Our first symptom may be our last. What exactly do they mean by sudden cardiac death? It's defined as the sudden, unexpected natural death from a cardiac cause, a short time, generally less than an hour, after the onset of symptoms in a person without any known previous condition. Most know that the #1 killer of both men and women in the United States is heart disease. What people may not know, though, is that, according to the American Heart Association, for the majority of Americans that die of heart disease, their first symptom occurs not years before they die, but literally minutes before they die. In our last hour on this earth, in agony, all the dietary change in the world isn't going to reverse our course. Even if the paramedics snatch away our milkshake, refuse to stop at our favorite fast food joint en route to the hospital, it is too late. One moment, we're talking to our family, and less than an hour later, we could be gone forever. The #1 cause of death in America is not just heart disease, but more specifically sudden cardiac death. People dropping dead in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Is that just what happens when you get old, though? Your ticker just conks out, your pump just wears out on you? No. That's why Dr. T. Colin Campbell's work was so revolutionary. In fact, he's the reason I chose Cornell. At the same time Ornish was studying what effect a plant-based diet was having on hundreds of people, Campbell and colleagues were studying hundreds of thousands. Here's just one of the 894 pages of the Oxford-Cornell-China study. Let me share just one statistic. Guizhou County in China, where among a population of 246,000 men over 3 years, there was not a single recorded death from coronary artery disease. If that was in the U.S., that many men, it would be thousands of recorded deaths. Instead, there were none. There's nothing natural about heart disease. So when Dr. Esselstyn talks about how most heart disease is a toothless paper tiger that need never exist, and if it does exist, need never progress, he's not exaggerating. Nobody else has to die. Plant-based diets can prevent, successfully treat, and even reverse our #1 killer. In his landmark article, Resolving the Coronary Artery Disease Epidemic Through Plant-Based Nutrition, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn notes how fortunate we are to possess the knowledge of how to prevent, arrest, and selectively reverse this disease. However, he goes on to lament we are not fortunate in the capacity of our institutions to share this information with the public. He blames ties to industry and politics, resulting in conflicts of interest within our private and governmental health institutions, compromising the accuracy of their public message. This is in total violation of the moral imperative of the medical profession, of course. Now is the time for us to have the courage for a legendary work, he concludes. Science must dictate dietary recommendations. After all, the fact that a low-fat, fiber-rich vegan diet is likely to reduce risk for most types of cancer, ischemic heart disease and its complications, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, osteoporosis, multiple sclerosis, gallstones, renal stones, appendicitis, diverticulitis, hiatal hernia, varicose veins, hemorrhoids, and possibly the chief metabolic complications of pregnancy, disorders which collectively are responsible for the majority of the deaths and hospitalizations in Western society, should be sufficient to recommend it. Of course, those who are only willing to make less striking changes in their lifestyle can be encouraged to reduce their consumption of animal products as much as they can. In the process of writing this paper on the comparative endocrinological effects of plant versus animal proteins, the researcher himself was overwhelmed by the balance of evidence and disclosed that during the course of researching and writing this article, my findings impelled me to become a vegan. Why don't more within the scientific and medical community similarly embrace a plant-based diet? Part of the reason may be the tomato effect. Coined in the Journal of the American Medical Association 27 years ago, the tomato effect describes the rejection of highly efficacious therapies by the medical establishment because they happen to go against the prevailing conventional wisdom. Imported from the New World by the year 1560, the tomato was becoming a staple of the continental European diet. At the same time, it was actively shunned in North America for literally centuries. The reason is simple. They were poisonous. Everyone knew they were poisonous, at least everyone in North America. It was obvious. Evidently, it was not until 1820, when some dude ate a tomato on the steps of some courthouse and survived, did things finally change. And today, in the United States, tomatoes are a billion-dollar crop. Examples of this tomato effect, a slavish devotion to orthodoxy, are mentioned in medicine. For example, ignoring the successful use of this plant in the treatment of gout for 1,000 years before modern medicine quote-unquote discovered it was the drug colchicine. Aspirin was also ignored for almost 3,000 years of successful use as a willow tree bark extract. But I'd like to extend the tomato effect analogy into the field of nutrition. For example, thousands died of scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, for 100 years after lemon juice was found to cure it, because disease at the time was considered an imbalance of the humors. What role could eating fruit possibly play? A century later, in the mid-1800s, humanity came up with the brilliant idea to polish rice from brown to white, causing an epidemic of sudden death from heart attack in Asia. Millions died of beriberi, vitamin B deficiency that affects the heart muscle. Again, the cure was discovered, rice bran or rice bran tea, yet there were decades of death before the medical community finally woke up and actually adopted it. Today, there is another epidemic of sudden death from heart attack. It too is caused by diet, and it too has a cure. How long must we wait? McCarty ends his paper, I suspect that the simple injunction, do not eat animal products, has the potential to do more for world health than all the abstruse wisdom in all the medical libraries combined.